All right, hey everybody. Delighted to be here with you. So my background is actually physics and material science and all that kind of stuff, and I spent most of my time in the medical device world shrinking the size of pacemakers and implantable defibrillators so that they fit inside the body a lot better. And I had come up with some technology that was really important towards doing that. We did a little startup company here in the upstate called Maven Capacitor, which we then sold to a larger company called Venturetex in California, and then St. Jude Medical bought Venturetex, and then finally Abbott bought St. Jude Medical. So we went from 4 guys in a flower shop that looked a whole lot like this to 600 people out at the Liberty Commerce Park, and did some pretty fun things. But in the evening, I've always had this other interest in my life, which was particularly keyboard instruments, but musical instruments and where things came from. What was the start of something? Where did it all begin? And so that's one of the things that I find most fascinating. And so as part of learning about early harpsichords and pianos and clavichords and all that sort of thing, I began to really want to know, well, where did the harpsichord come from? What was its beginnings? What did it look like? And fortunately, there's a fair amount of material that I and others have put together, where we can say, well, this is what we're seeing. So I put together this little talk actually for the Historical Keyboard Society, but it's a good, I've kind of repurposed it for you guys so that we take a little jargon out, and if you have any questions while I'm talking, just say, Tom, what the hell? And I'll try to give you the answer. So recreating the earliest harpsichord from the Minden Cathedral altarpiece. What does that mean? All right, well, let me tell you what that means, because this is fun. So none of you have a background in early instruments, and that's good. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here talking, you'd be telling me. So where does it all start from? So for keyboard instruments, they began on or about the year 1350. And they began with a musical instrument that was called the Exchequer, or Exchequer d'Anglaise, or just what we now know as the checker. And if you've ever played the game of checkers, that's where that word comes from. It comes actually from Exchequer, which was this very interesting instrument that is built like chessboard. And on the top, you would play the game of chess, but sticking out the side are a set of keys, and then people would go along and they could actually play this instrument while they're playing the game of chess. Now in 1350, chess was not just a game. Chess was this metaphysical, this is life versus death versus prosperity versus despair, and etc. So they really took chess very, very seriously. And this ability to strike the chords of harmony while you play the game of chess really kind of stuck with them. Later, the clavichord as we know it grows out of that tradition. It loses its chessboard on the top, and in fact becomes a much more intelligently shaped musical instrument. The chessboard creation, just to tell you this, was so couched in mystery and just lost to history that up until 1995, no one had ever seen anything that they could say looks like it. But as it turns out, in the Cathedral of Le Mans, France, in the Chapel of St. Mary, they had painted angels on the ceiling playing all the musical instruments of the time. The ceiling had never been restored. The paintings were in terrible condition, but with careful restoration work, you could bring the paintings back. And as they were bringing them back, lo and behold, they found an image of the checker, this chessboard-looking thing with keys sticking out the side. So we know it's true, we know it's real.
What year was that you said they discovered it?
Say again?
What year did they uncover it?
Well, they uncovered it in 1995.
95.
So the chapel was painted in 1380. So this was a 1380 art that was being brought back to life. If you ever go over to Le Mans, France, you want to go in that chapel because it's one of the most gorgeous things in the world. So that's where we are here. In 1397, we have mention of Hermann Pohl as the inventor of the harpsichord. A gentleman is writing to his son this series of letters. The letters survive. And he describes meeting Hermann Pohl on the road, and Pohl has just invented this harpsichord, and we know it must be small because Pohl is able to travel with it fairly easily. And he's just talking about the virtues of this thing that he's seen. And so that's where we see the harpsichord show up. And then in 1420, between 1420 and 1425, there's an altarpiece that was made, and I'm going to show you that in a second, for the Cathedral of Minden. And it features the earliest known image of a harpsichord. And then we go on to the manuscript of Henry Arnaud de Zwolle, and that's actual instrument drawings. And then from 1480, the oldest surviving stringed keyboard instrument, and an upright harpsichord that's at the Royal College of Music. So it gives you an idea of where all this stuff is coming from. So now what have we got? Well, here's this altarpiece that I spoke so glibly of, and it's about 4.5 feet tall and about 9 feet wide. So this is enormous. This is a big thing. In it, we have this rose, and in the roses, there are angels doing various things in every little segment. But in this segment, the angels are all playing musical instruments. And we've got the lights on here, so you'll have to bear with me, but I'll get you a little closer to that in a second. So this is this important altarpiece. This is one of the drawings of Henry Arnaud, and so many instruments have been made based on this drawing because it's effectively dimensioned out. It's a drawing. You can make these instruments and hear them and enjoy them. So that's not really the challenge. Albertus Pictor, Albert the painter, paints images of angels playing musical instruments, including the harpsichord here, and also here we see the angel playing these little harpsichords. So that's pretty cool. And this is that thing in the Royal College of Music. So it's actually an upright harpsichord. You play down here, the hammers or the jacks come at you, and they pluck like that. Works pretty well. So it's a lovely instrument. So stringed instruments, where do they come from originally? Well, they came out of the Middle East. And when the Western world went into the Crusades and into the Middle East, they came home with musical instruments, including things like this. This is called the hogshead psaltery. And this is an instrument that's really quite ancient. It's been around for thousands of years. In the Arab tradition, we would never think of putting keyboards to things. They want the human to interact with the musical instrument. That's important to them. So humans actually play the instruments by stroking them or sometimes plucking with a quill, but mostly by using your fingers. The my-cannon, or the half cannon, is actually one of these kind of cut in half. And so when you do that, this would be all but impossible to put any kind of a set of keys to. Here are the treble strings, here's the bass strings. The best I could ever hope to do is put something that would work from the top on this. But as you can see, if you had an instrument that was shaped like this, well, down here, that makes perfect sense for a place where you might put what we think of as a keyboard. And that was where the Western mind went. Yes?
So what would the relationship between a psalter and like a harp be? Or
Well,
is
they're
there?
both stringed instruments. The harp has the soundboard like this, and the strings are open. And on the psalters, the strings are over the soundboard themselves.
Right.
So is one better than the other? Harps can be made very, very large. Psalters are rarely made larger than what you're seeing this image of King David play right here.
So was it, I guess what I'm wondering is it a progression of going from a harp or a lyre to?
So imagine, rather than a progression, that since each will have its own kind of voice, that all of those voices were valid, and those things would actually exist or coexist. In the Arab world, they tended to go with things like this. The Egyptians, which are kind of part of the northern Arab world, harps were very common there. In Greece and across the Mediterranean, harps were well known. The Irish harp was a harp brought into the UK countries by the Romans.
Harps I imagine are a little easier to build too, aren't they?
Well, no. Actually, they all have their own challenges, but they also all have their own voices and their own approach and the music that you would play. So if we go back to this fellow here, this is a kind of a close-up view, and here's this little harpsichord that he's playing. This is a little clavichord. This guy has a hogshead psaltery. You can see the shape of it traced out just like that, right there. And then this guy back here has what looks like a pot, and it is. It's called the rummel pot or rumbling pot. It's a pot with a membrane over the surface and a stick that comes out, and you wet your fingers, spit on your hands, and you go, and you make a rhythm with this rummel pot. Kind of a folk instrument now. So this gives you an idea of how much we had to work with. This little fellow is, in reality, he's 8.5 centimeters long, so 3.5 inches long. That's the size that we're going to be trying to work with. Why even attempt this? Well, one of the reasons is that the angels that we see all over this altar are in this less stylized, more sophisticated rendering. It was a new type of way of doing art that had just emerged when that cathedral was built. This would have been sort of the earlier look, and it's almost cartoon-like. So from this image, almost nothing can be learned because it's been so heavily stylized. But this guy, I'm going to prove it to you, he's actually looking at real musical instruments and real people. Each face is going to be a little bit different. So one of the things that you'll notice right away is that this instrument has got the treble in the left hand and the bass in the right hand. Before we say, oh, well, he only did that so it would fit inside the carving that he's doing, I'll point out another carving from much further away. This one actually is in England. And here we have the bass on the right and the treble on the left. If it's the first time you've ever done something, one is as good as the other, right? I mean, particularly if somebody was left-handed and that was their dominant side, then why not put the melody down here? And in fact, even today, sometimes people will build pianos mirror image for left-handed players. But I'll tell you what, nothing gives you a headache faster than sitting in front of an instrument that's been turned around.
African balafons are still played like that.
So one of the things that I did to prove it to everybody, I took Photoshop without changing the dimensions at all. And I just flipped the harpsichord around, and as you see, it would have fit very nicely in that rose. He was doing what he saw. But because I wanted to build an instrument that at least I could play, if not maybe somebody else, I've gone with the mirror image here as the way of doing it, because that's how life has actually transpired. We picked a direction, and that's the direction that we've gone in. So how do you get dimensions for such a thing? Well, here's one good way. So this girl that you see here, lovely young lady, does not exist. She is the average of 200 young ladies who stood or sat in front of the camera, and they've done a computer average. And you can see in the hair, here's all these different hairstyles, but now we've taken it down to her. I used her because I wanted to use, from measure of man, you can get all this stuff. These are the average dimensions for all these various pieces of the human face. Well, we also have this wonderful angel's face here, very carefully carved. Why don't we use that to pull off all the dimensions? Because what are we trying to do here? We're trying to see if, in fact, this harpsichord could even exist. When Ed Kotick saw that image for the first time, he said such a harpsichord couldn't have more than 2 octaves, and maybe just an artistic imagination. I think it was a real thing. So now we can start to really put some details around it. We've got a couple of radiuses here. We've got this big radius for the outside, another little radius for the cheek, and we can work out the length of this instrument and the width of this instrument. So now I'm starting to reduce it to a thing that you could make a drawing around. But we need more information. What do we need to know? Well, the first thing is it doesn't show a bridge, and it doesn't show where the jacks actually are. But here's something neat.
What's a jack?
So a jack is, this is a jack. And a jack is a little piece of wood that has the plectra in it, and then is hinged so that it can fall back. And it's going to be the thing that actually plucks the string. So that's a jack.
Hey, Tom, another question.
Yes.
You're probably going to get to it. How do you know how many notes and what octaves?
I won't get to it.
Okay.
All right. Notice something important in this carving. Okay, if he was just making this up, right? He's just making it up. Why is this rose rotated compared to that one? And why isn't this right dead center? Okay, why? Because there was a bridge that he was looking at. And that bridge would require this rose to actually be turned so that the hole doesn't run into where the bridge would be. And this one has to be over so it doesn't run into where the bridge would have been. So once again, this guy is looking at something. He's not just making this up. And that's an important point. Now, you asked how many naturals. So why don't we do this? We will look at the one existing instrument, the clavocytherium from 1480. We have the Ghent altarpiece that allows us to actually pull off real dimensions, and then we have this Urbano clavichord, which also is actually full size. It's a wood inlay, but all of them have roughly 530 or so millimeters for 3 octaves. All right, 3 octave measurement is kind of a standard thing for us that do this kind of music history thing to measure, because if you just measure 1 octave, well, you'll have a little bit of error. Once you measure 3 octaves, the error is almost nothing. So a Steinway, a modern Steinway today, or that piano over there, is going to have a 3 octave measurement of about 490 millimeters. So this is wider. These keys are wider. And we're going to build it with wider keys. We can also consult the clavichord that's in this drawing, because I can actually see 4 of the keys. And so 4 of 12 or 13 naturals are shown, and guess what? They come out to 528 to 530 millimeters for a 3 octave measure. So once again, yes, all trying to say the same thing. So if we assume 528, there's room for 13 naturals, almost 2 octaves, not quite. That's enough to start making some music. Where should the bridge be? Where should the nut, where the strings are going to leave the case, be? Well, we have also some instruments that we can measure, and we have some drawings that we can go to, and we come up with an understanding of, for the highest string, about 9 centimeters is what we're looking for. And so once we know that, we can lay the rest of the scale out. And as it turns out, you know, you can't get too crazy with the scale, or the note will sound terrible, or the string will break. So scaling is a scientific thing, and as it turns out, this clavichord, this harpsichord is laid out very nicely for an intelligent sort of scaling. So again, we think it's real. What should the mechanism be? Because it doesn't show a mechanism. Well, a mechanism from Arnaud's drawings are fairly complicated. What I decided to do was, since that wasn't the part that I was trying to understand the most, let's have a fairly simple, straightforward jack that looks like this. It connects to the key lever in an intelligent way so that the weight of the key can pull the jack back down. And so this will also help us understand how tall should our harpsichord be, because we can't really tell from the carving how tall the harpsichord was, but you know, once you say, well, I got to push the key down, and I got to have a jack come up, and I've got to have room for all that to work, you come up with a kind of a minimum dimension of about 3.5 inches, and that's what we came up with. So roughly 3.5 inches tall. What to build it of? Well, at the time they would have used a pine base, and they probably would have used cypress wood and cedar for the sides, because those are really great tone woods, and they make nice instruments. And a lot of the early stuff that we see is certainly uses cypress as its base. And then when we get to this really tight radius, that tight of a radius, you're not going to be able to easily bend wood. You might have been able to soak it in ammonia and then bend it like that. I don't know whether they had that technique available to them. I've done a sawn cheek, and that works out pretty well. And so at the end of the day, you wind up with this instrument that you see before you. And here is it compared to the image that we had from the carving. And there's one of my son's friends who had dressed up for me, and so she's playing the part of the angel, showing how this thing would have been done.
Hey Tom, how did you, were music notes then the same as music notes now?
So the answer is yes, and by 1420 we actually had a full set of accidentals and naturals. However, one of the things that we're going to answer in our next exhibit at the museum, I'm with Sigal Music Museum in case I hadn't mentioned that carefully, but where do notes come from? Where do they come from? Well, they come from some simple geometry, actually. If I make a string or a horn or a pipe or something that makes a note, I have my note. If I double the frequency, that's 1 octave. So that's the octave. If I cut the frequency in half, that's called a fifth. All right? And then I can get a fourth and a third and a second, and then there are the half steps in between, which are the accidentals. And so that gives us the 12 tones. Do other cultures have more than that? Absolutely. Indian music has a lot of microtonality that goes on, but it's all based around a 12-note format, or 12-note basis. And those 12 notes come from the fact that certain notes, when you play them together, they sound really good and in harmony. And if you change the frequency a little bit, well then it doesn't sound so great anymore. And our brain recognizes patterns, and it loves patterns. So that's where the 12 tones come from.
In your modeling from the woodcut to the reel, when you think about a string, you've got the metallurgy of the string itself, or if it's not metal. But
so
how did you come up with wire gauge and or tension?
We as human beings have been drawing wire for a very, very long time. And the art of drawing wire actually dates back to Roman times, but certainly in the Western countries, if you will remember the chainmail, well, that's little wire loops that are put together. Wire was drawn, particularly in Germany, at a fairly high level. What wire to choose? Well, it turns out the instrument will tell you. If you put too thin a wire on it, then you're going to get a very, very thin and feeble sound. If it's too thick, particularly with a harpsichord, it starts to sound metallic and clunky very fast. So it kind of narrows down the gauge that you can use at any one part. And of course, all the wires are not the same diameter. So as we go up the scale, we're actually changing, we got 3 different diameters on this particular little harpsichord. And so that's, the instrument itself is made up of a certain amount of science that you can't really get around. So you're gonna use things that are from this box. Now, which one did you choose? What I did, of course, is being heavily informed in harpsichord lore, I picked the most intelligent string gauges that go with that. And I knew they were going to work because they're pretty much in the center of the box. But you could choose other things. What did they have? We will never know. We will never know. Those instruments are all lost to us, the very, very earliest. All we can do at this point is say, was it real or was it just a fiction? And as I was building this, the idea was to try to show if you can imagine that sound in one of those huge cathedrals, maybe with the guy over here and he's plucking away and making his music, the clavichord is playing, everybody's being quiet, it actually carries a long, long way. So even a little instrument like this, which, gosh guys, this weighs about 6 pounds, it's nothing. Easy to carry around. But, my contention is, it also was once a very real instrument. Harpsichords grew from this, and when you go to the museum, you'll be able to see some that it takes 3 of us to pick up and move about because they're ponderous harpsichords. But these little things like this and the psaltery are kind of where it got started. And so I hope you found that story, reasonably interesting. Question?
Yeah, would it be safe to say that they just picked the materials and the sizes and said for what sounded good to them?
To a certain extent, they did. Now, why did they start with something, so small? Possibly because they had to carry this around with them wherever they went. And so you can build this thing up to about 3.5 feet long, and then it becomes kind of a pain to trot. This wouldn't be hard to move at all.
Well, then it wouldn't fit in the carving. It wouldn't fit in the carving.
It wouldn't have fit in the carving if it had been giant.
No, you got me thinking about a pre-electricity ancient world without TVs, without all this stuff, and just being able to hear that music at all.
And so, of course, there could be no hope of ever recording or capturing. At this time, we aren't still even writing music for keyboards quite yet. All the music is written for voice, and the keyboard work would have been something that they improvised to get to. But it's coming quickly because by 1480 we do have music, for the keyboard, and in the 1500s it explodes.
On the altarpiece, do you think they may have had strings as part of the sculpture?
What do you mean by that?
Like where they had the harpsichord, the psalteries up there, do you think they may have actually put strings there too as part of the artistic?
I wouldn't have expected that. I can say, just going back, what we're seeing here is something of a ruin, all right? But this is the original gilding on here, and my guess is that he never included the details of a bridge or any of that kind of thing. Certainly he wouldn't have thought of, because this is it's no bigger than that. It's really tiny. So You know, this thing that we have made here is a blow up, you know, from this tiny cartridge. But I enjoyed, you know, just the thought process of, you know, well, how would you come to that? How would you ever think to, you know, reduce it to something that's a practical size?
Is there any possibility it was not metallic strings, something like catgut, or I'm thinking of
There
guitars?
were instruments made with gut, but on such a small instrument as this, I don't think gut would have been successful at all. That usually works on a larger instrument, and the Lutenwerk, or gut harpsichord, was really a creation of the 18th century. You know, between 1720 and 1750, it had its day in the sun. Bach had one and really liked it. There are several makers in the world now who are recreating the Lutenwerk, and it certainly has a very interesting sound, but it's largely around the lower frequencies where the gut string can work. These guys have metal strings on them, just like the psalteries and the clavichords and those other things that they had. And metal strings were not a real problem. Could you make wire in 100-meter lengths like we do? No, that's not what they were doing. So they imagine there's a rope up to about that ceiling, all right? And I've got a swing. And I've got some big tongs. And I swing forward. And I grab this iron and I pull it through the opening, you know, so through the die. And then I release, and I grab it again, and I pull it through the die. And I actually have a very long travel here, but the wire is being made in roughly 10-foot, you know, pulses. By the 17th century, they had applied water wheels to things, and now you could begin to pull wire as a continuous thing. And you know, by the 17th century, you know, yes, you could make 100-meter lengths of wire. First, you know, the ways it works is you rarely go through more than 2 wire diameter changes at a time in those days. Today, we start with something about like this, and it'll come out as fine wire after 18 or 19 wire changes, and it's reeling off onto a reel. If you've ever gone into one of those shops, it's the loudest thing you've ever heard in your life, because all the wire is near the breaking point, and it's screaming through those dies, and there's you know, coolant flowing over the dies to keep things cool. But even with the earplugs and the earphones, you're fuzzy-headed when you leave, and all the guys that work there are deaf as posts.
Back to the design of the instrument itself, how much tension is on each of the strings, or how much of a consideration is it to make the body withstand the force?
Right, so that's a really good question. There is roughly 20 pounds of tension on each string that we see here, and you know, so we're under, you know, several hundred pounds of tension. But for a wooden instrument with even a modicum of intelligent design on the inside, that's not too bad. You know, we have the Stein piano at the museum. It has about 6,000 pounds of tension on it, and it has for the last 250 years. And you know, so that's like an SUV hanging off the side of it for 250 years, and there's not the slightest warp or twist. But a Steinway D has 40,000 pounds on it, and there's no wood in the world that could withstand that. So, you know, the full cast iron frame was an intelligent invention to address the need for the piano to become more sonorous and louder and you know, have more strings on it and all that. And that's another lecture. Other questions?
You were saying that the thickness or height, whatever, was driven by accommodating the minimum mechanism.
Yes.
Is there much experimentation to be done as far as like adding depth to change the volume that you get, or?
When you look at the makeup of this, you know, this is you know, fairly reasonably along the same lines as most other musical instruments in terms of how big is the resonant sound box. The roses, by the way, they're there ostensibly to quote, let the sound out. But in fact, if I leave the rose off, you can't really tell the difference. The rose, more importantly, is symbology. So symbology was tremendously important. If a musical instrument didn't look right, it couldn't be played, particularly not in church. So it had to have certain things on it. And, this one features the three holes. So, of course, that's the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Sometimes you'll find 5. 5 is also part of the Trinity. So the husband, the wife, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. And that's for the godly family. 6 and 12 are also important numbers. There's some numbers that are rarely used, like 2. 2 is not a good number. 7, not as often. 7 is lucky now, but it wasn't always lucky. So the numerology in the church was tremendously important. And there were people who were experts in this, and they would guide you, and then you made your things to look like that.
Is there any sort of what you've got here is boxy, but is there any reason to think that it wouldn't have been like gourd shaped or rounded, like a guitar?
Could it have been gourd shaped? It could have had a rounded bottom. Unfortunately, that meant that you would always have to play it in your lap, because otherwise it's just so much more convenient to lay it flat. We'll never know. We can't see the bottom of this thing.
Right.
What we can see are other harpsichords from the time, and they look like this with straight sides.
Okay.
So
Seems
I
like if it was
suspect
curved, they'd want to show it in
You're right.
carving.
I suspect it had straight sides.
Yeah.
Yes.
What about like carved into the side, like holes for the sound?
Could it have had carvings in the side? Yes, it could have had decorations in the side. It probably some did. But as you know, since we can't see the side and we can only dream and imagine, then I left that alone. Was it painted green? No, I have no idea. The artist certainly couldn't capture that, but he captured, I thought, enough, and so that made it reasonably compelling.
Well, so I guess it could have been opened from the bottom as well, too, right?
Well, you need a bottom. Without a bottom, I have nothing to take the strain of the strings. So I'm going to have a bottom. Now, modern pianos have an open bottom because all the tension on the strings is across the great cast iron plate. All the wood in that piano is to do one thing. And so you guys have probably seen where they take a car and they put it on 4 teacups. And the teacups support the whole car. This is true. This works. But the moment you begin to move the car forward, all 4 cups smash like that. Cast iron is the same way. Cast iron is a beautiful material, but it doesn't bend. It's brittle. And as it begins to try to bend, it breaks. And so all of the wood in the piano is to make sure that plate can never twist under all that tension. Compressive strength is enormous. You could put 3 times that much tension on a piano and nothing would happen, but you must not ever twist. Cheap pianos didn't use enough wood and they didn't use enough iron, and often they're the ones where the iron frame breaks. And then you guys know, you can weld cast iron if you heat the area up to 400 C and it's a bright rosy red, and then you do your welding. But it's a hit and miss every time. Other questions? I'm a font of knowledge.
The cheap part, what's the purpose of the cheap part?
That's a really good question. I suspect that a strap connected to this, and that was why they had put that on there. But the artist didn't show a strap, and I didn't try to build one. No other harpsichord image that we have shows the second bent side quite like this. We've seen them where it's a little more like this, and then this tight little thing up here, which does nothing but get in the way. I copied what he did.
Oh, okay.
But I suspect that was frustrating.
Oh, I thought you were gonna say the tonality of the.
And it could have been just, somebody said, well, that would look cute.
Maybe it's just an aesthetic flair. Just-
It could be an aesthetic flair and nothing else. But once again, why make it up unless you're actually seeing it? Why would you put that on there unless you're actually seeing it?
You mentioned a society of enthusiasts. Have you come across another individual such as yourself that was equally inspired to try and build an early harpsichord?
Well,
Or-
so a number of people have built the Arnaud style harpsichord, which is a little bit longer, it's a little bit larger instrument. And then there's one of those where he describes the very, very first piano action in 1440. It's a fairly crude thing, but it does work. And a number of people have built that, many Bosendorfers, to do. I'm the only guy that I know that attempted to build one from the first image. And so that's why it was a lot of fun. Yes?
How did you choose what the acoustic range is, what the frequency range for?
So that actually chooses for me. The first thing is, a string always sounds best right before it breaks. But we don't want to take it quite to its maximum strength. So what will we take it to? Well, why don't we take it to, say, 2 or 3 half steps away. That way, as a tuner, I won't break the string every time I try to tune it. So this is something that everybody has known and everybody has struggled with. What was the breaking point for that wire? Now we have some information because, remember I talked about the chainmail and such. There's been a fair amount of really intelligent material science work on early wire. And we know what it was. It's iron with a lot of phosphorus in it. Now, an iron with a lot of phosphorus in it makes a type of steel. It's not carbon steel. In fact, if you put carbon into it, it becomes very brittle and you can't make wire out of it at all. So iron with phosphorus is an early type of steel. And what they had to learn, what the Japanese had learned, and then that kind of filters into Western thought in the 1820s, is if you'll purge the phosphorus out, and they weren't sure what they were doing, but they knew they were taking something out of the iron and then put carbon in, then you make carbon steel, and that's like 4 or 5 times stronger. If I put modern music wire on this instrument, I'll kill the sound, because I won't be anywhere near the breaking point, even though I'm at the same tension. And so the wire will just sound kind of flabby and dull, and so you want to use the right kind of wire. It has to be a wire from their time. And fortunately, there's a guy from Canada, Stephen Burkett, who has been doing that for several years now. And so for our harpsichords and our early pianos, we now have access to a truly authentic wire that would meet the same specifications as when that thing was built. And that's cool too. But it takes a community. I mean, you can't just make all this stuff up on your own.
I notice you don't have a jack rail on that.
I don't, and the reason for
What's
that
a
is,
jack rail?
so the jack rail fits
Sorry,
over the
using jargon
jacks,
here.
That's okay.
and it keeps the jacks from popping out. Early harpsichords, particularly the little ones, use some sort of a capture mechanism to capture the jack, so it never was going to come out like that. What did we do? Well, I put a little steel pin in the bottom, and I put a super magnet in the key lever, because that way I could work on the darn thing and still do what it needed to do, which was capture the jack. And that's one of those where I don't mind telling you, yeah, I used a little bit of modern technology. No, they did not have super magnets back then. But it's a way of doing it. Could I have done it in the traditional way? Yeah, and I don't want to. Anybody else?
So you just built that in your own home shop?
Yes. Yeah.
Did you have like CNC router and stuff, or
I,
you just do it?
No, this is, quite honestly, almost all of this is hand tools. I've got some electric tools, and I have nothing against electric tools, but, when you're starting to get to the smaller things, you can do a lot with a hand tool that an electric tool will just tear the piece up. So I'm happy to always, use a traditional method if it'll work, and it works pretty well.
How many years ago did you make it?
This was made in, when was that, 2010? Yeah, about 14 years ago. I was kind of going through a phase then, and I wanted to trot this out and, show it at the Historical Keyboard Society. So they enjoyed that.
You are now well-renowned and appreciated within the community of...
Well, so there's people are always going to be detractors, right? I mean, you're going to have some people say, well, that was great, and others that are going, well, I just don't think you brought enough academic, credentials in to show such a thing. And it's kind of, well, good for you, I've made as many points about why I thought this was a legitimate target, and then what we did to make it legitimate, and so it's all right. I've gone on to publish, a number of articles and a couple of books, and so I'm in good now. I'm not any problems.
I will say that I've seen labs and academic research done in France on identifying paint chips in the harpsichords that have thanked Tom for his contributions to the science.
You had a question?
So obviously you've taken these hobbies and doing elaborate things. Is musical instruments your core of your hobby, or do you do completely different things? What else? I'm just curious. Have you done totally different things in your free time?
Well, I've made some tables and things like that. I enjoy woodworking, so I had made some copies of some of the early 18th century stuff that was being made in the South before we stopped doing all manufacturing at all here, and that kind of thing. What else have I done, Deborah? I mean, I'm always into some kind of trouble.
Trains?
And I have a BFA in art studio. I got to the point where one of the more important art galleries had offered to represent me, and I was just coming out of school, and I did not know what that meant. But it was a huge offer, and I just said, well, no, I'm going to stay in science. So probably made the right decision. I've also done a lot of economic development stuff. So SC Launch, I was with the SCRA and was part of the little cadre that broke off and got SC Launch started, and then SC Bio really didn't exist in South Carolina. There's a North Carolina Bio and a Georgia Bio. We need an SC Bio, so I started SC Bio with a couple other guys, and that's grown into a huge organization here in the state. And I'm really happy that the biomedical industry has an advocate for them. And Next Innovation Center, when that opened over there on University Ridge, was an early advocate for that thing happening. And organizations take different turns in their life, and I don't know where they finally went with their thinking. But my idea was, when we started our little company 30 years ago, there was no help for the entrepreneur in South Carolina at all. You asked around and the wind whistled through the trees. So is there not something that we can put together? So Launch has been pretty good. Milwaukee came out of SC Launch and seems to be surviving and I hope thriving. I've done work with them in the past. Great bunch of people. Anybody else?
Trains?
Oh, I did say trains.
That's right, trains.
Trains, oh, you gotta love trains.
Let's go down that
And no, not HO, they don't make any noise. I want the big O scale stuff. I want it to rumble down the track, And,
Three-rail line yet?
if you hadn't noticed with the white hair, I'm a baby boomer. So, I grew up with trains as a kid. and then the trains, you know, kind of go away. And so when we bought the house, there was this big room downstairs. It's like, what are we gonna do with that? Well, I don't know. Well, I think the trains might come back to life. So I had put together this elaborate layout, and it was, you know, New York City in the background, easily down at the bottom, Hoboken, New Jersey over here on the side. You know, once you got a train started up and going, it was about 2 minutes to make one loop. You know, so I could run 5 trains at a time. And, you know, the kids would come down there and we'd have a great time at Christmas. But I was running trains, you know, all
They
year.
wired everything under the platforms. It took you a week to figure it out.
All the kids would get under the platforms and start moving connections. Don't do that. But, and then, you know, this interest in early musical instruments, you know, one thing and then another began to appear in the train room, and finally, you know, I told Deborah, you know, realistically, we'll never sell this house with this installation in place. This is nuts. You know? So the trains are not gone; they're just sleeping, but they're going to come back in a smaller way, and the room has been nicened up, and so we'll be able to do some other things with that. You gotta have fun, man. It's just,
You just gotta find a trained person to sell your house to.
There you go.
well, thank you guys. I appreciate it.
First string instrument ever built.
When was?
First string instrument ever built.
So we don't know, but what we do know is that in one of the rooms in one of the pyramids, they found a harp where the strings were still on the harp, and as you pluck the string, it still made a musical noise. So at least 4,000 years, and probably further back than that. You know, there's several ways that you can make music. The voice is the oldest. Flutes have been found in caves that are at least 10,000 years old. We have found lithophones. What is a lithophone? Lithophone are a set of rocks set up to make some sort of musical scale. And you can beat on the rocks, and it's like a marimba. It actually makes a pretty good musical tone. Flint is a great rock for that. So they found lithophones 50,000 years old, still set up. What kind of sound did they have? They had a diatonic scale. Just like that, regular diatonic scale. So, you know, once again, where do those come from? They come from the fact that certain things work in your brain and certain other things don't.
Wow. That's one of the nicest connections of all night. That was a very good talk. Thank you again.